and you're back tuned in listening to another episode of And Then We Win, the sports social work podcast that's meant for you, the listener or the watcher, to learn more about sports social work and all the components that help make a team successful, an athlete successful, a coach successful. Anybody within the dynamic of sport can be successful when you begin implementing the important factors of sports social work. My name is Dr. Justin Singleton, and I am a co-host for this show, and I'm also the founder of Just Single Vision Consulting. And we have two very special guests on this episode. We have Roz and Christine from Athlete Wellness Consultants, and I am so excited to have them join us on this episode. A lot of their work revolves around the love for the athlete, but most importantly, the love for the whole team dynamic that is essential towards making sure that everyone is successful in the sport that people are involved in. And so we talk a lot about communication, how we have conversations about mental health in the spaces that we are, as athletes, existing in every day. And so hopefully that you were able to take something back to your team or the culture where your loved one or anybody that you know is present in a team dynamic can take this and thrive. And so we have a great episode. We got Kobe Jones, my other co-host, and she brings her Kobe's Corner 3 on this episode. And so I'm going to stop talking and we're going to get right to the episode. So I hope you enjoy. And thanks for tuning in. And most importantly, share this episode with your friends and your colleagues, as you can find us on YouTube, Spotify, and Apple Podcasts. So enjoy this episode. All right, and welcome to another episode of And Then We Win. We have a full house, and I'm so happy for this opportunity. Of course, we got our resident co-host, Kobe Jones, all the way from MTSU. Representing today. You don't have an MTSU shirt on today, so or anything paraphernalia.
No, I just have on an Athletes Unlimited.
Oh,
okay. Gotta rep AU Pro. Gotta rep AU Pro today.
Okay, we'll take that then, because you've been repping MTSU very heavily over the past couple episodes. And then also we have I'm excited to have these two special guests, Roz Wilson and Christine Mosher from Athlete Wellness Consultants, based out of Colorado and Massachusetts. And so they're split. They are the Batman and Robin of sports social work. And so we're happy to have them on our episode. And do you have anything to say before we get the party started? You know, like I said, honored to have you all here. And I'm very looking forward to our conversation that we're going to have here this evening.
Oh, Justin, thank you so much for inviting us. This is really fun. We're excited to talk about athlete wellness consultants and sports social work and athlete mental health. That's what we love talking about. And so we're really honored that you invited us to be a guest on your show.
Thank you. Thank you. And Roz, thank you for being here. You know, if I get a little nervous, it's y'all because she's a kickboxer. She's like a grand champion. If you look at the website, she has trophies and there's a very happy but intimidating look on the website. So if I get a little nervous, stumble over my words because she's intimidating. No, but she's a great person. So, but thank you for being here.
Hopefully the British accent will help calm you down a little bit, Justin.
I might get more subscribers because of that. So we'll be looking forward to that. Everybody loves our British accent. And so thank you all. So let's just dive right on in. And so when we were having our conversations via email back and forth, you all shared that, and I could tell that, well, let me rewind. First of all, how did this happen is that miraculously, I got an email from Christine after I sent out the APB about saying, hey, I need some sports social workers to be on the podcast. Lo and behold, when she responded, I was looking at the flyer that was sitting on my coffee table from Athlete Wellness Consultants because I just returned back from the symposium in New Orleans just a few months back, and I had been looking at the flyer like religiously for over a couple of weeks. And so lo and behold, Christine emailed, she said, hey, I'm going to go on the podcast. I'm like, great. And so it was very important. I love your aspect, what I saw on your flyer, because you always look at not only just the athletes, but also those who are leaders in the athlete space as well. And so most of us have a reason why, or like, you know, we see something that's missing in this work and we decide to attack it. And so no pun intended with the word attack, but, you know, thinking about that, why did y'all see this as an important space to, you know, support, whether it be coaches, leaders in the space far as mental health?
Yeah,
Ross, you want to start?
Sure, yeah. So I guess I have kind of like multiple reasons. Firstly, my background is as as an athlete. I competed for a long time for Team Great Britain, and then as I was coming towards retirement, I then went and worked at the Olympic Games in 2016 and 2020. So I worked in the boxing. So I've always had an interest from being an athlete, a coach, and working in sports. And then I've also always been a social worker during that time. And so I think coming from like a mental health perspective and bringing that into sports, I just really felt that there was a need to see the athlete as a whole human being. So we talk a lot about performance when it comes to athletes, but I think we kind of miss out the athletes human beings as well, and that there are so many aspects to them. And so I felt like that part was missing, perhaps, that we focused a lot on on performance. But what about how an athlete is managing, their relationships and their social lives and their family life and, their physical health, and then also their mental health and how they deal with the pressure, both on and off kind of competition. So for me, it was kind of the combined experience working in sports and then being a mental health practitioner for kind of all of my adult life that brought me to this kind of wanting to do this work and just seeing this really big gap for like addressing athletes, seeing them in the kind of holistic way, like as human beings. So for me, that's kind of where my passion came from. And then, as I became deeper in the work, into the work, I found that, not only did we need to put the onus on the individual athlete, but actually we needed to focus on the team around the athlete. So coaches, athletic trainers, parents, partners, and just felt this big need to kind of like educate about the importance of athlete mental health and seeing athletes as kind of the whole. So yeah, I'll pass it over to Christine, but that's certainly where my kind of passion lies.
Yeah, and I think, Ross and I have similar mentalities about this and philosophies about this. I too grew up playing sports my whole life. I've been an athlete since I was a kid. I played basketball and soccer and tennis and track. And then I did that in high school. And then when I went to college, I played soccer. And after college, I continued to play soccer at Boston College. And then after that, I continued to play in women's leagues in Massachusetts and started the Cape Cod Women's Soccer League, the first all women's soccer league down here on Cape Cod in Massachusetts. And as I became a social worker, I started to think about, I wonder if there's a way for me to combine my interest in social work with my passion for sports. So I did a little Google search and I found the Alliance of Social Workers in Sports. And they are a group of social workers from across the country and actually now in international of social workers who are interested in athlete mental health and other social justice issues impacting athletes. So I had a conversation with the then president, Matt Moore, who is now also our current president again. And he was just so enthusiastic about this topic of athlete mental health and recognizing all the pressures that athletes are under. And like Ross said, seeing athletes as whole human beings and not just sport robots. So I became involved with that organization and met some wonderful people and started attending the symposiums and learning more about sports social work myself. And then I ended up doing some of my own presentations on topics such as female athletes and body image issues and eating disorders and youth sports in America and how that has changed over the years and how much pressure that we put on kids now in youth sports and kind of encouraging them to specialize in one single sport at an early age and how difficult that is for kids and all the pressures that puts on them. So I think as my education has developed over time, I've also really enjoyed speaking about topics related to these issues. And one of the things we noticed is that coaches are doing a great job at coaching their sport, and they might be an expert in their particular sport and coaching, but they really didn't have too much education about mental health. And so mental health conversations didn't really take place in the athletic world too much. And we're starting to notice that, some famous athletes are starting to speak up about their own mental health struggles, which is helpful because it helps normalize the conversation. So now we're bringing more awareness about that athletes struggle with mental health issues, just like any other human being does. But we need to help coaches and trainers and other professionals who work with athletes learn about these issues and learn how to talk about them and how to help athletes seek the proper resources and how to make athletes feel like it's okay to talk about this and it's okay to seek help. So that's where athlete wellness consultants kind of get started, is like
Hmm.
trying to fill that gap of helping coaches and athletes and teams talk more about this in the sporting world and help raise education and awareness so that coaches feel more comfortable talking about this with their teams.
I love sports social workers because we get it. It's like it's one of the things that we also have been involved with sports probably since for many years. I think everybody on this panel right now has been playing sports and still play some form of sport involved
Yeah.
still to this day. And then also we understand the components of like how mental health has an impact on the athletes. And so
Hmm.
well, thank you all for sharing your background some there. But to me, it's funny in a sense because I coached soccer for a couple of years back in my heyday, and I always think about I used to tell my athletes how important communicating on the field is, and so
Hmm.
every team sport communication is the key to winning. And
Yeah.
then we also talk about how coaches how they communicate with their players that helps build relationships and whatnot.
Mhm.
But I do not get, maybe y'all can help me understand, why is it so challenging to communicate about the most important things, which is mental health between our athletes? So, how do why is it so challenging? And what are some of the things that are needed to like help overcome those barriers with communication between athletes and the coaches about mental health?
Well, I think like there's, that stigma of talking about mental health or acknowledging that you might be struggling with some type of mental health issue. It was not really spoken about too much in sports. And so anyone back in the day, people would think like if you talked about that, if you were having a struggle, it was seen as a weakness.
Hmm.
Anyone seeking help would be seen as like a weakness. So I think that that was the initial reason why it's so hard to talk about it, because in the past we've looked down upon this. We've looked at this
Hmm.
as if it was a weakness, and that's not what athletes represent. Athlete represents strength and perseverance and drive, and to admit that you might have some vulnerability is not very common in the athletic world. So it's usually just keeping those feelings to yourself. But unfortunately, when you do that, a lot of people suffer in silence, and they feel lonely and isolated and disconnected. And that's just makes the whole mental health problem a lot worse. So that's why it's important to talk about it, to try to bring these issues to light. Sometimes another reason why we don't talk about it is because people aren't educated in it. We don't know. How do we identify what the signs of depression are? How do we identify anxiety? What does an eating disorder look like? What does substance abuse look like? Sometimes we don't know all the answers to these questions. So that could be another reason why we might not be discussing this as much as we should within the athlete world.
Mm. Ross, I got
Mm.
a question for you. Maybe I don't know if you want to
Sure.
follow up with that, but I was just thinking along the lines. So, like, these are very targeted conversations that have to happen. And so, for somebody or a coach who may not have as much knowledge about, like, hey, how do I identify depression, or what are the things
Yeah.
that you're looking for? Just to have that conversation, and in such since it's so targeted, should a coach approach those targeted conversations with their athletes, and maybe vice versa too, if you have any input about the student from the athlete perspective to the coach?
Yeah, and I think that's like such an ongoing dilemma. And I think it's really depends on, sometimes it's a generational thing. Like we have more old school coaches that don't do that. And then you've got kind of newer coaches or within a university or college setting where people are more educated. One of the ways I explain it to my athletes, especially when they're first starting treatment, is that tell me the worst injury you've ever had. And let's say, maybe an ACL tear. And I'm like, okay, how did that go? Well, it was painful. It was difficult. I had an operation. Then I worked with the PT and the athletic trainer. I followed a certain training plan, and, there were bumps in the road. And I kind of propose that mental health is a little bit like that too. It's just
Hmm.
like having an injury. It's a
Yeah.
condition. And so what we need to do is kind of understand the problem and the diagnosis, and then build a treatment plan around that. But that isn't just an individual person's job. Like, just like an injury, we need a doctor and an athletic trainer and a personal trainer, physical therapist. And
Hmm.
so I try and kind of use language that perhaps is more familiar to both the athletes and the coaches. Right, we do this for physical injuries. We can do exactly the same for your mental health too. We can put a plan together. We can work together on this. We can educate the different areas from, family to coaches to so on about like the need for that treatment plan, just like you would do with any other injury. And so I think being able to use language that people understand, and I think especially for coaches, they like to know, how's it going to influence performance? How's it going to help? So I think if you can use, that positive language, that if we're able to do this, one, we're supporting the athlete, but also it's going to benefit their performance overall, because it's an important part of their performance, being able to be mentally fit as well as kind of physically fit. So I think it's just starting at that level, remembering not everyone has that knowledge that we do as clinicians. So meeting the individual, both the athlete and the coaches, where they're at, and helping them understand in a way that is easier to put across, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And so, I know you mentioned, I like how you think about where like it is not just one person that needs to be involved with the treatment. It's like, how do we get all people involved? It's whether it be a team doctor or a psychiatrist or sports psychologist or whoever's available. And so sometimes a lot of coaches, they may feel like, okay, I don't have all these things. And so, I may have to be, maybe two or three of those roles at once. And so how should coaches be supported in making sure that, they have the skills and be able to have that conversation with them? Because I feel like a lot of the times it's just usually like, okay, I want to do it, but I don't know how to do it. I don't know what to do, like to take the first step. And so if you had like a step-by-step playbook or plan, like what would that look like from a coach perspective?
I'm going to let Christine answer this, but I just want to say thank you, Justin, because I think it's a really important conversation that not a lot of people have. So, we're starting to increase the conversation talking about athletes, but sometimes, I think we kind of might target the fact that coaches just don't know. But I think it's important to recognize that they wear a lot of hats.
Yeah.
When I was competing, I saw my kickboxing coach more than I saw my parents and my partner. He supported me through a difficult day at work, as well as when I was training. He supported me through the wins and losses of when I was traveling for competition. So I just wanted to point out that I think it's a really important conversation that you're highlighting, and I'll want to hand over to Christine for that one.
Yeah, I think coaches first have to be aware that this is something that they need to kind of educate themselves on and take it upon themselves to learn. You have to take some responsibility for like, hey, this is a topic that I don't know too much about, but I do understand that it's an important thing for me to learn about. And so, maybe I need to educate myself and maybe seek out resources, seek out athlete wellness consultants to come to your team and, try
Shameless
to
plug.
talk to you about like all these issues that we're discussing here, or ask if you're working at a college, ask your college athletic director, hey, can we please have some education and training about how to talk about these issues? Or talk to your team, ask your team, like, what do you need? How can we be supportive of you? And kind of have the team give some feedback. I think the coach kind of sets the tone for what the team dynamic is like. So if you have a coach who's open to conversation, even acknowledging like, hey, I don't know all the ins and outs about all this stuff, but I am interested in learning and I want to hear from you what your needs are. That way you get a feel for what the team needs and you get some feedback. So it's a collaboration. And so anyone who kind of sets the tone like that is going to help the team help themselves. You really have to be open and to be willing to learn and educate yourself and have a conversation with the people who are around you. It's like a family. Being on a athletic team, sports team is like being a family. And, the parents, the mom and dad are kind of like the leaders of the family. And the coach is like the same way. So it sets the tone. Like, what kind of family do you have here? Are we having a family that talks about problems? Are we talking about supporting one another? Are we sharing ideas? Do we know what's going on in each other's personal lives a little bit so that we're like actually treating each other like, human beings, not just coworkers? All of these things matter. And so there's no one size fits all answer to that. But I think the priority is on openness, awareness, and willingness to educate yourself and communicate with each other.
And a little bit of that leads on to like role modeling as well. I think coaches themselves have to be able to, take breaks, like
Mm,
show that they are, engaging in self-care and, able to have these conversations. Because I think, we learn from others. And I think coaches have a real power of position. So position of power. And so like if
mm-hmm,
they're able to role model being open, role model accessing self-care, then it kind of gives permission for the athletes to be able to do it, because I think a lot of the time athletes are really wanting to try and please their coaches. But
That's
if the
right.
mm-hmm,
coaches are giving some permission to be like, we're able to take a time out, or we're going to talk a little bit about our mental health. And even if they're just able to say, this was a rough day for me, just being open and using some of that language, I'm feeling really happy today, or I found it really emotional because my kid won something. I think just kind of
mm-hmm.
normalizing conversations about the emotions that we have, that can
Yeah.
be helpful. I don't expect every coach to have a degree in psychology, but if they're able to just be personable and demonstrate that they can do it, I think that helps a lot.
Yeah. And it's helpful if teams have, somebody on staff within their team that's part of that team. But just as like when an athlete gets an injury, you would send that athlete to the trainer and, they would tape their ankle or put ice on it or whatever they need to do to take care of that. And you could easily do the same thing. Like if someone's having a mental health issue, you have somebody in-house that you can refer to, the team therapist. It makes it so much easier for athletes to access that care.
Mm-hmm.
And so, typically that doesn't exist in the athlete world. And if it does, it's more like a sports psychologist, which is more focused on sport performance.
Mm-hmm.
So sports social workers are kind of uniquely designed to kind of see athletes as the whole human being, as we talked about before, and not just an athlete who's coming in for help on how I can do better a job in my performance. So having an embedded sports social worker or a sports therapist within team is a great way to kind of bridge that gap. If the coach doesn't know, all the ins and outs and how to talk about mental health, at least you have somebody there to refer to who can help with that.
Thank you. I was just want to say we had a full circle moment because we just interviewed a coach just recently, and he talked about how important modeling is. And so it's like, the players actually pick up on like, okay, if I'm doing certain things, then they'll start modeling themselves. And so Roz pointed that out. It's like, okay, yeah, we
Mm.
could talk about mental health, but the coaches need to be participating in making sure that they do the things to protect and support their mental health. Because if not, they're like the athletes, like especially when it comes to high school athletes, they're like, "How you gonna tell me to do something you're not doing it?" And so they pick up on that
Hmm.
real quick, like, and you
So
probably
true.
hear it quite often too. And so it's very important. It's like it's a full circle moment. We talk about how important modeling is. Not only should we talk about the athletes should be doing it, but the coaches should do the things to protect and support their mental health as
Mhm.
well. And Christine, I think you've been looking over my show notes because you're hopping into the topics that I want to cover already, which is great because
Oh,
we
okay.
talk. It's a very important thing to create a culture of saying, hey, mental health is a thing, especially for our athletes. And so, we know a lot of our coaches and our teams, they're good at creating culture. And so I wonder like if there's any like golden nuggets you can talk about, like how do we start off with developing a culture so that we can have somebody like athlete wellness consultants come in and support our mental health, or like, what do we do to take the first steps to have the conversation? Because a culture has to be created. And once they start buying in, that's when you start seeing our athletes start getting more engaged. And so, what do you believe is very important to help develop a culture so we can take maybe in the next step of supporting athlete mental health?
Uh, Well, as we're talking, I'm thinking about a specific coaching style that I think is really helpful. I don't know if you guys follow the New England Patriots at all, but that's my home team here in Massachusetts. And we have a coach, Mike Rabel, who is doing an amazing job with the team. And if you watch any of the after game footage, he is right there shaking hands and giving hugs to every single player that comes off the field. And he looks them in the eye and he tells them, great game, good job. He's smiling, he's hugging them, he's in there in the locker room, he's telling them how awesome they are. And, this is kind of creating the team dynamic that we're talking about. He cares about them, not only as players and sport performers, but as human beings, as individuals. And you can tell that. And the players respond to that. Players are going to play better for a coach that they think cares about them as a person. They want to perform, they want to do well. So that's the first thing is, like you said, the modeling, creating this atmosphere of like, I care about you as a person. I celebrate you. I celebrate our victories together. We celebrate our losses together. We're a team. We're in this together. This type of dynamic is perfect for setting the groundwork for people feeling comfortable. If you have a different style of coach, like our previous coach, Bill Belichick, he was a little more tough, hard school, like flat affect. It was all hard work. Let's go to work. Let's do this job. And there wasn't really too much warmth and friendliness going on there. No warm fuzzies going on there. You can get success out of your athletes with, either style of coaching, but you're not going to get that same type of like warmth and team dynamic that creates that positivity and that vibe and that culture where you feel comfortable being open and honest and vulnerable. And that's kind of what we're talking about. That's what we're looking for.
I think we talked a lot about how a lot of it is on the coaches. I think it's like sport as a community as a whole is starting to change as well. So I ran an intensive outpatient groups for retired NFL players, and we've just developed like a mentoring program where we're training up these guys to go back out and talk about their experiences. And we have an ambassador that goes out and he talks in high schools and he talks in colleges and he talks at NFL events. And I think like there is something to be said for like the community changing their culture as well. So we're talking about the individual responsibility, the team responsibility. But if we're all talking about the importance of mental health, then it's easier, it's more visible. Coaches are catching a conversation, they're catching a podcast, they're having someone come and speak in. You've got former athletes that are coming forward and saying, hey, this is going on for me. And so I think there's also, a responsibility within the sporting world. And I think we're starting to see that cultural shift, with some key athletes coming out. And I've worked in the Olympics for a long time. And that was really key when Simone Biles came out and said, that I'm not superhuman. This has happened for me. And there was a lot of backlash online. And then we were able to talk about, how does that then impact someone when they are receiving a lot of kind of negativity online. So I think it's like, it's very social worker-y of me to say, but I think it's kind of that whole macro level input that like, yes, there is a responsibility on the coaches and the teams and the athletes. But listen, those of us that love sports, that are in sports in all different variety of positions, if we are keeping the conversation going, we are normalizing it, we are seeing athletes come forward, I think that's where the culture shift comes. And then it becomes easier for coaches, right? Because it's normalizing the conversation again. So it's not that the coaches are having to grasp at something, it's like everyone is having this conversation. And we're not quite there yet, but if you compare now to say 10 years ago and then 20 years ago, you do see a massive progression in that. And social media has some benefits and some negatives on that half. But when I am able to take a group of male athletes who want to come out and talk about their mental health, like that's winning to me, right? That's progress. And then they're able to kind of like spread that message to the next generation.
Yeah, and oh gosh, this is great positive words. And I also think about on the flip side, because I'm the type of social worker, I'm like, okay, yeah, we have all the good stuff, but like there's some situations that may occur where it's like, okay, we really have, it's a doozy to work with a particular team or athlete or deal with his culture. And so I'm thinking about like, okay, we have talked about the people who like, okay, I introduce it and on board and they're moving along the right path. What about those interactions when it comes to dealing with people who are just not just really clicking? It's just not, they're still in the archaic idea of like, okay, mental health, oh, what is that? It doesn't matter. And so how do we address those areas or those teams or those coaches when it comes to like shifting the dynamic where for those who are maybe not so much on board at all?
Yeah, that's the challenge for sure, is trying to change somebody's mind, try to help them see something from a different perspective. Some people are more stubborn than others. Some people are more open to learning and changing. So, it kind of depends on the person. Maybe having a one-on-one conversation with that person and talking about, hey, listen, I know that this is kind of the way you think about mental health, and this is kind of the way you grew up and how you played sports. But, we're developing a new type of dynamic in the sports world now, and the younger up and coming athletes are kind of demanding a little bit more understanding and recognition about athlete mental health. So we kind of have to change with the times. So you kind of have a little conversation, try to get somebody to understand the importance of this issue, and maybe they'll soften up a little bit, and maybe you can kind of get in them to change a little bit. I think it can be done. Some people want to dig their heels in and just stay the way they are, not change. And, that's unfortunate. But we try to have conversations and communication and express the importance of talking about this and the importance of helping athletes be their best selves. And hopefully we get, a cultural shift, and then we get people who are willing to see the importance of this and making changes in their coaching styles and communication styles.
And
Roz, your answer is going to be, you'll start with a jab, 2 or 3 jabs, and then a roundhouse kick. Is that what
yeah, right. I was about to say you've got to speak people's language. Do you know what I mean? And I think sometimes it's just like slapping some facts on the table as well. It's like you want it's like I said before, you want your team and your athletes to perform better. This is what's going to help. Here's some stats. Take it that way, right? Because if people aren't going to respond to the more kind of mental healthy approach, it's like, this is why it's going to help. Here you go. Right. Here's some stats to show you so. And I think you can kind of I feel like you have to meet people where they're at. It's like when you're a therapist and you've got someone that's really resistant to treatment. Sometimes it's going to take months and years to get them there, but it's like about finding a common ground and helping people to understand why it's going to be a benefit to them, right? And if it's an old school coach that, their main focus is winning and performance, well, let's show them. Let's show them why it's going to help winning and performance, even before we get into the conversation about how it's just, going to help people generally in kind of human nature. It's like, okay, you want to win, we know this helps, let's talk about it that way. Make it simpler, I think, is my thoughts. Totally.
That's great. And I like the idea that you're going to be persistent about it, and so and understanding that there's a connection of why we're doing this. And so meet people where they are is very important. I think that's a very important role that social workers take on, or a task that we take on, is like meeting people where they are. And so we're going to find different ways. And so for those who are future clinicians in this work, or you want to help develop relationships, you always be persistent out and meeting people where they are, whether it's, nerding out and give them the whole DSM-5 and helping them understand, like making the connection, or it's just really just providing like just basic, simple language, like, hey, this is what you want, this is what you're going to get out of it. And that is the way that we can help in that space. And so thank you for sharing that. And so before I ask some more questions, Kobe, we want to hop into our Kobe's Corner 3. And she's going to give us our hot 3 takes, 3 questions that comes from Kobe's Corner.
All right. So the first one, I said, what does effective communication between a coach and an athlete look like in such a high pressure environment?
Ooh, that's good.
Oh, that's a good one. I mean, it depends on when and where this communication is taking place. Are we talking about in the heat of a moment in a game? Sometimes conversations at that time can be emotional and, heightened. So maybe you're not going to be communicating at your best self in moments of stress like that. So if you have something important to talk about that's not like immediately addressing the game situation, then I would say like take it on the side, take it after the game, set up a meeting to talk about a certain issue in quiet space, private space, one-on-one. Look each other in the eye, like, hey, I'm concerned about this. This is what I've been noticing. Can you tell me a little bit about what's going on? That's effective communication. You're talking about concern. You're giving the person who's listening an opportunity to share what's going on. You're not coming at them and yelling at them like, hey, you sucked in that last game. What's wrong with you? What's going, you need to perform. You need to get better. Like, that's not going to work. That's not effective communication. That's just making an athlete feel ashamed and blamed, and they're just going to shut down. So showing compassion, empathy, support, awareness, validating their feelings, being open to listening to feedback. That's where I feel like effective communication is. So you kind of have to be in a calm place, quiet place, one-on-one, and let the person give some feedback so that you can have some back and forth conversation.
Yeah, and yesterday actually one of my athletes said like all they ever wanted from their coach was a bit of empathy. Like they didn't want sympathy, they didn't want to feel like a victim, they just wanted someone to kind of understand it from their point of view, and that was pretty poignant for me. I say to my guys that humans have 2 superpowers. and that's empathy and self-reflection, right? And so I feel like, you know, coaches that are able to just, however angry or frustrated or whatever they are, to just take a step back and put themselves in their athlete's shoes. So showing empathy. And I also think non-verbal communication is important. Sometimes there aren't any words in that moment. We're in playoffs at the moment, right? Sometimes there isn't any words right then, but just like Christine said before, a simple handshake, a hug, not being standoffish in your body language can make a massive difference as well. I think we say a lot without saying it.
Right. And then my second question, I think this might go along with this as well. So, like, what are the signals that coaches can send athletes that it's like they're in a safe environment, and that like they can sit there and talk about like their stress, anxiety, or even burnout.
So, what can coaches see in their athletes to know that they're in a safe environment? Is that a
Yes, like
question?
what signals can coaches send to their athletes to like let them know that hey,
Send.
like you can come to me, you can talk like this,
Okay.
like yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I think like that, showing that empathy, that caring, that compassion, asking them questions about like, hey, how was your weekend?
Hmm.
Did you have a good time at your mom's birthday party? How was that? How are things going in school? Are you keeping up with your classes? Everything going okay there? So you're asking them about other things that are other than the sport and other than like, did you do your workout training this weekend?
Hmm.
So you're seeing them as a person that, that you care about them. I think kind of showing that, or even like if it is related to the game, like, I really noticed that you were working hard on that particular skill that we were trying to work on. I really appreciate your efforts. It's really showing out there. So you're recognizing someone's efforts and you're verbally saying this to them. This makes an athlete feel seen and heard, valued, and respected. And so if you're kind of creating that dynamic with your athletes, then you're going to be creating the kind of atmosphere where you're able to talk about things that are a little bit difficult, like mental health or any other types of, stressful conversations that need to be had.
Yeah, I think just back to the nonverbal cues, having an open door, like literally having an open door, makes a
Hmm.
big difference, right? I feel like there's this kind of stereotype thing of like coaches slamming doors and that be it. I'm sure you've all watched Ted Lasso, that
Love it.
British class, that
Yeah,
that British American partnership classic. That is how it works. But yeah,
it's awesome.
literally having that open door, verbalizing, I'm available at these hours if you want to come in and see me, having an extra
Right.
chair in the office, or even the coach coming and spending time like in the common area, whether it's where the athletes are working out or in the locker room. So I think it's just like making sure there's, not too much of a divide between athlete and coach themselves.
And then for my last question is how can coaches evaluate whether their communication style is helping or harming their players?
That's a good question. I mean, if a coach is open to getting that kind of feedback, that's amazing. You might have to have an outside person come in to kind of evaluate that. You might have to ask the team to do an anonymous survey, something where you're allowing yourself to get feedback, which is a very hard thing to do sometimes. So even if you're doing the best job as a coach, sometimes you might get that one comment, like any of us, we get feedback. We love all the positive feedback. We get that one negative comment. That's the one we dwell on. That's the one
Hmm.
we worry about. That's the
Oh,
one
they
that's,
hate me. I was like, the worst person in the world. After you
yeah,
say 20
exactly.
positive things.
Yep. So, to be open enough to be like, hey, I want some feedback. I want to know if I'm doing this right, if I'm doing this well, if just anything I could be doing better. That's an amazing coach. That's very open. But I think you have to have some, like maybe an outside perspective coming in and looking in and observing maybe, and then pointing out some like, hey, I noticed you said this like this. Maybe you could try it like this another time, or maybe even opening up, like I said before, to the team itself, or giving an anonymous survey or getting some feedback from your assistant coaches. If you have a good relationship with your assistant coaches, maybe you can like actually ask like, hey, do you think the way I'm talking to these guys is good? Is this motivating? Or you feel like it's beating them down? How do you think that's coming across? Do you have any other suggestions on how I could do this in a more effective way? So being open to feedback from your coworkers can be helpful too.
I love the fact there's so much focus on communication. Like I hear that a lot between the work that you and Christine and Roz that you're doing, and so it's very important. Like when we start to build relationships, the most important thing in order to build it, we have to communicate amongst each other. And so, do you all work with coaches or coaches in particular with making sure that communication is the key and addressing that this is a very vital to the work of reaching to your athletes.
Yeah, I think that is hugely important is the communication, the openness, the tone, the nonverbal communication, the staying connected. It's just like when you're a coach of athletic team, like Ross was saying earlier, you spend so much time together. And so you want to be kind of mindful of how are you bringing yourself to this time that you have together with your team? How are you presenting yourself? Are you showing up as a coach, as a leader in a way that you feel proud of at the end of the day? When you go home at the end of the day, can you look back on your day and say, like, hey, I feel really proud of myself for the way I handled that situation, for the way I communicated with my team? And you know that you're doing well if you have your team coming to you, if they have your team talking to you, if they show up with practice on time, they're showing up with enthusiasm, if they're laughing, if they're talking to each other as teammates, if there's good team dynamics between the teammates. This is how you know you're doing a good job. You're seeing all that positivity and stuff. If you notice your team is like dragging their feet, they're coming late, they've got frowns on their faces, they're like not really into doing the drills, they want to get out of there as soon as practice is over, like there's something wrong here. We need to take a look at this. People are not happy. People don't want to
Hmm.
be here. So, what can we do to change that dynamic and that feel that we have created? We need to create a more positive atmosphere. And we do that through communication. Like, how can we make this better?
Yeah, and I think sometimes people kind of get lost in the weeds that it has to be such a well thought out or directed conversation. Like it has to be very strategic. And so from what I'm getting, it sounds like you're saying sometimes it's just usually just talking, just in general, and help building that lines. And so should people feel like it's more like we have to have a really direct conversation about this mental health piece, or is it more of like, hey, let's just build off a conversation and then going from there? Because sometimes I feel like it's usually what people feel like is the barrier for them. They feel like they have to be the professional in this space and not and just sometimes just usually just having conversation.
Yeah. I think it's going to probably vary from team to team, from coach to coach, and
Hmm.
how the communication has already set in place. I mean, sometimes it's just kind of creating that atmosphere and the vibe that people feel like, you know what, I think I could talk to my coach about this, or my assistant coach about this, or one of my teammates about this. And it doesn't necessarily mean like the coach has to stand up in front of the team and say like, hey, we need to talk about mental health today.
Hmm.
It could be, it doesn't have to be like that. It could just be something like, hey guys, like if there's anything going on with you that you feel like you need to talk about, just let you know I'm here for you. I'll do my best to hear you out and help you out. If there's something I don't know, I'll give you the right resources so you can get the help that you need. I just want to let you know that I care about you, and we can have this conversation, just open to hearing about how you guys are doing. So it doesn't have to be like, I need to talk to you about anxiety and depression today. No, that's awkward. But
Yeah.
if you're just kind of creating the dynamic of like, I care about you, I want you to be your best selves. If there's something that you're struggling with, please feel free to talk to me about it. I think that kind of will go down a little bit easier for everybody.
Yeah, and I think it's also important that we have to I feel like we have to address that it's not just a one and done conversation, but it also does have to be like we have to beat it across their head every time. In
Right.
order for us to have like cultural shifts to change or whatnot, we definitely need to make sure that we include it as part of the culture. So we're saying,
Mhm.
maybe it's like, once a quarter or maybe like once every
Yeah.
other month. But it's very important to make sure that it's just not okay, we checked this off the list today, and now we're just going ahead and keep business as usual.
Right. Yeah, I like that idea, like a quarterly check-in or something like that. You can either do it like in-house, and just like, hey, let's have a little conversation. How's everybody doing? Is there anything we need to bring up? Or you could have an outside person come in, either like if you're in a college, sometimes maybe somebody from the college counseling department could come in and like do a presentation about a certain topic, and that can spark conversation. So there's a variety of different ways that you can kind of create that opportunity for education and awareness.
And you bring a very vital point because, as Ross mentioned earlier, we noticed that coaches do wear a lot of hats. And I'm from a small town. Some of our coaches, I've known some people coaches had to cut the yards, cut the grass for the game, and also even line the yard. I mean, get the lines on the football field and stuff like that. And they wear so many hats, and so it's critical to let people know that you don't have to do it all by you don't have to do it on your own. There are specialists out there that are willing to help.
That's
And
right.
because we don't expect you to do it all. It's just like, and plus, there's most of them are teachers too, so they understand as a teacher they have to do so much, and so
Yeah.
just know that there are people there to will support and advocate along the way, and so
Yeah, absolutely.
it's very
And a
critical.
lot of teams have like sports nutritionists and dietitians now, because we're recognizing the importance of proper nutrition for athletes. And we assume maybe that an athlete knows how to properly fuel themselves for their sport, but that's not necessarily the case. So
Hmm.
it's good to have someone whose uh, profession it is to learn about, to know about diet and nutrition and how to fuel properly for your sport, and have them come in and do a presentation or to help teach them how to cook proper meals. These kinds of things are important for athletes. And we just assume that athletes are going to know all these things on their own, but that's not true. We need to teach them. And part of being dynamic team and a progressive team is to kind of put these kinds of pieces in place to help support our athletes all around.
Okay, and I guess I'm gonna throw this question out there as a shot in the dark. If your message went out to every athlete in the world, as soon as we hit send out to the various social media platforms, what would you tell athletes? This is what we need to do about mental health. It can just be anything. But more important, like this is what we need to do about your mental health and making sure you take the next step.
Okay, if I were an athlete and I was noticing that I was struggling with something, whether it be anxiety or depression or substance use or eating disorder, these are the most common things that athletes struggle with. I would say don't suffer in silence. Don't struggle all by yourself. There is help available. You don't have to suck it up and play through the pain. That's an old school mentality. The new school mentality is you can get help. There's help available, and there's nothing wrong with seeking help. That's the right thing to do. So try to help
Mm,
athletes understand, like, you don't have to suck it up and play through the pain. You can seek help and get help for whatever it is that you're struggling with. If your college or your team or your professional team does not offer those services in house, you can ask for resources and ask for resources that are in your area. Or we have telehealth available now, so you can access therapists and psychiatrists and care all across the country. Right now, social workers are specialized within their certain states. If they're licensed in the state, they kind of have to practice in their state,
hmm.
but several other resources are available. So you can check to see first what's available in house in your college or your high school or your sports team. And if they don't have anything specific for you in house, you can look for referrals outside. The second thing is just like recognizing that it's okay to be not okay. That slogan, it's okay to be not okay. And many people struggle with mental health issues. There was a survey done through the NCAA a couple years ago that said that like 33% of college student athletes struggle with mental health issues, but only 10% sought help. So that's a
Mhm.
lot of people who struggle did not access services that they need. And so we don't want that to happen. We want people who are struggling to seek help and to get the resources that they need to get better.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that because there is a stigma when it comes to who to receive support from. That's quite
Hmm.
often. I've heard a couple of circles from those who work in the field. Like I know some people who work in the industry of sports outside of social work. And some of the things that they have noticed is that when it comes to gaining support, they might not get involved because they're just like, hey, well, we know that our information may go out to the coach and it may have a negative impact on whether we are able to play next game or things might get out. And
Right.
so, of course, we know as social workers by our code of ethics, there are certain things that we just cannot do. And one of them is just like, is through client confidentiality. And
Hmm.
so, and I think that's important that we also need to make sure that that is understood too, is that yes, you are going to see a therapist. And if you don't feel comfortable, for whatever reason, whether to do it in house, but still let you know there are resources available, externally from outside your team that you still can get support from. And so,
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I understand that. But we want to have resources easily accessible for athletes, but sometimes athletes, like you said, might not feel comfortable with the in-house person for that very reason. But
mhm.
like you said, too, we do adhere to a code of ethics, which includes confidentiality is of utmost importance. So that being said, there are other resources available, outside resources available. The Alliance of Social Workers in Sports does have their own directory of clinicians who have been vetted and are uniquely positioned to serve athletes. There's also the U.S. Olympic Committee has their own vetted resource of clinicians who are available for athletes. And then there's several other directories in the works. Natalie Graves has a directory for athletes seeking support, and so she has a directory of clinicians, and there's several other kind of directories like that in the works where you can seek out an outside resource. So we just have to look for it. They are out there, and just don't let the barrier or the stigma of seeking help prevent you from getting the help that you need. There's no need to suffer in silence because there is help available.
Yeah, and thank you for sharing that. And because it is critical to as we look forward to moving our field forward, and this is the way we do so. But yes, we always got to push the mission forward, and so we've been here for a while. We'll probably be here, but I could pull out about 4 or 5 more questions out of my hat and keep the conversation going. I do want to give everybody the opportunity to, as we talk about the name of the shows and then we win. And so we think about, of course, as a social worker, we think about, okay, what are the things we need to make sure that we support all the people we serve to making sure they can get to the next level. And usually when it comes to team sports, winning is the thing. But before we even think about winning, like what is it that you feel like is important to address before we even think about the concept of winning as an athlete or coach or anybody dealing with sports?
So I don't want to be cliche, but when me and Christine started Athlete Wellness Consultants, our kind of line was athletes are human beings too. And I feel like if that's one thing like that I can point out and try and educate before we even talk about winning is that athletes are human beings too, that, all areas of their lives are important, that, taking a biopsychosocial approach, looking at, getting to know your athlete right from the get-go, like who are their parents, what do they enjoy doing as a hobby, like how did they get into sport. So if that would be my biggest kind of takeaway that I and the message that I'd want to get across is like, and the same for those of us that are fans of sports, when we're at home watching them, like, be inquisitive, like what are these athletes, who are these athletes, rather than just the people you see, shooting hoops or scoring goals. So I think that would be my number one kind of advice to work towards winning is see athletes as human beings too.
Yeah. And another thing I think of is like when you're like a retired athlete and you're looking back on your career, a lot of times what we think we're going to remember are the wins and the losses and the records and the championships. But actually what you remember is the relationships that you had and the feelings that you had with the teammates that you had and the friendships that you made. While we're in the moment of competing, yes, winning is what you're shooting for and that's what you're going for. But as you look back over your life and you get older and looking back, you realize like that wasn't the most important thing. The most important thing that I got out of it was like I had these amazing friendships, amazing experiences, learned some brilliant life lessons. And that's what makes winning all more special.
Oh, wow. Thank you for sharing that. I think it's very important because we tend to forget not only what we have to see the athlete as a human being, we also have to understand the importance of what the human needs are to make sure that they're included in that space too. Because yes, they are the athlete. We uplift the athlete so much, and they have a lot they have to put on their shoulders too. But not only do we say that they are human beings, we have to understand that they also require the same human needs through the Maslow hierarchy of chart, and then also making sure that they have it too, and that is very critical in this space. And so, thank you for sharing that. And before we go and wrap up, Christine, I will let you know I did let you get away with the Patriots talk. I'm a Pittsburgh Steelers fan, and so I will try not to take out those parts where you talked about Mike Vrabel and one of the greatest coaches of all time through Bill Belichick. So I'll leave that
Justin,
in.
I'm a Packers fan, and so you're welcome for having Aaron Rodgers.
Come on, New England Patriots, we got this.
I was just, as soon as you said I was ready to hit stop record and end the whole conversation. But however, the professional, I tried to keep it in and let the show go on. So thank you all for sharing that. What you provided for us this evening has been a great take as we look at the overall, like what the coaches and the athletes need to make sure they are successful. So we know that relationship building and communication is the key, and it doesn't have to be that hard. And so thank you all for sharing that for this evening. And anytime you want to come back on the show, please feel free to come back on. We can talk even longer. I'm almost telling everybody they have to do a part 2, but because there's much more to talk about in this work that our people need. And so thank you for being here this evening, and thank you for being on another episode of And Then We Win.
Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Kobe.
Thank you both, and thank you for all you do.
Yeah, great job.
And thank you for tuning in to And Then We Win. My name is Dr. Justin Singleton, and I'm a sports social worker. I love what I do. And if you're interested in learning how I can best support your athlete, your parent group, or even the team, please feel free to reach out to me at info@justsinglevision.com. That is info@justsinglevision. Feel free to contact me for a free 30-minute consultation so we can figure out how we can best support the mind, vision, and action of your athletes. Thank you, and take care.